Hello everyone, and welcome to our first online sociology lecture. We'll begin with Unit 1, and you can follow along in Chapter 1 of your textbook. So let's look at what you're going to learn in this video. Primarily, we're going to focus on what sociology is. We're going to define sociology as the scientific study of human behavior. We're going to look at being able to distinguish between macrosociology and microsociology. People often understand other disciplines. If you ask people what psychology is, or history, law, biology, people have an answer. But they often scratch their heads when you ask them, well, what's sociology? So in this video, you're going to learn that sociology involves scientific study and not simply common sense. You're also going to learn to distinguish between concepts such as agency and structure, finding the general in the particular, and being able to see the strange in the familiar. So your textbook defines sociology as the scientific study of human behavior and human society and social behavior. So let's look at our society right now. Society is characterized by pandemics. People are beginning to understand the word epidemiology and what personal protective equipment is. COVID-19, missing and murdered Indigenous women and children, the legacy of Canada's residential schools, Black Lives Matters, transgender rights, social movements. So we can see society and social behavior is changing rapidly around the world, in Canada, in your neighborhood, and within your home. Sociology as a discipline studies these changes. It provides you the tools for understanding how these changes occur and what they say about our society. Have you seen the movie Castaway, starring Tom Hanks? In it, Hanks becomes stranded on a deserted island, and with no human interaction, he turns to a volleyball which has come ashore, and he converts this into an object that he talks to every day, that he socially interacts with, and that he takes on the raft with him as he tries to leave the deserted island. And when the volleyball becomes lost at sea, Hanks grieves. So what we can take away from Castaway is the intense need for social interaction by human beings. We know that sociology also overlaps with other social sciences. It overlaps with anthropology, psychology, economics, political science, history, and geography, and it also overlaps with other disciplines. Sociology studies the influence of different components of society on people's behavior. So let's take a look at some of these different disciplines using the topic of homelessness. So if you were a criminologist studying in the field of criminology, which is a subdiscipline of sociology, your focus is on crime. So your key research question when looking at the topic of homelessness might be, are crime rates higher among the homeless? If your discipline is economics and your focus is finances and economy, you might look at the topic of homelessness using this research question. What's the financial impact of programs for the homeless? Political science, how do government officials respond to homelessness? From the field of psychology, how does homelessness affect individuals' emotional and mental health? From the field of social work, the research question might be what services are provided for homeless people? And from the field of sociology that looks at social factors and society as a whole, we might ask questions like how does gender or age or social class impact homelessness? Or how does homelessness affect communities and families. So you can see how the topic of homelessness could overlap among the different disciplines. So I've taught for many years, and I'm bringing you some of the opinions and perceptions of previous students. I want you to meet Kat. Kat was a student at Niagara College. She's now doing her master's degree in sociology at Brock University. And I asked her the question, after all of these years, what do you think sociology is? And here's what she has to say.
So sociology is straightforward study of society, but an in-depth analysis and dissecting of the system and the structures and the institutions that exist in the society and how those things affect the people in that culture, which is important if you ever actually want to solve social issues.
So, as Kat talks about, sociology studies human and social behavior. It includes culture, social structures, relationships, social interactions, and the study of society as a whole. The major components of social structure are statuses, roles, social networks, groups, and organizations, social institutions, and society. What's a social institution? Let's look at some examples. Family, education, religion, economic institutions, and political institutions can all be found in our society. And let's distinguish the differences between macro-sociological approaches and micro-sociological approaches. So micro-sociology is a study of sociology on a small scale. It zooms in on small groups to study individuals within them and how they interact with one another. So it's the study of small social groups, like your peer group or your sociology classroom. Macro-sociology, on the other hand, is the sociological study that's done on a large scale. So it studies things like social institutions, for example, marriage or sports. We define it as the study of large social groups, like all college students in Ontario. So look at the comparison here. Microsociology might look at a specific peer group or your small sociology classroom. Macrosociological approach might look at all college students in Ontario. To learn more, check out on YouTube Khan Academy's video on macrosociology versus microsociology. It's a very good resource. So in your textbook, on page 10, they talk about a man by the name of Auguste Comte, and that's how you pronounce his last name, Comte. And he is the person who's credited as the founder of the discipline of sociology, or some people call him the father of sociology. He was the first person to actually use the term, and he believed that society could be studied in a scientific way. He believed that that systematic study of human behavior could actually be used to help to improve society. So let's look at sociology then as a science, which is what Auguste Comte wanted us to do. So a lot of people will often say to me, oh, sociology is just common sense. But let's look at what common sense is. Common sense is subjective. So if a woman is involved in a car accident, sometimes out of common sense people will say, gee, women are terrible drivers. Common sense also ignores facts. It's often based on myths and misconceptions. So people will say, well, if you live together with somebody before you get married, it's more likely your marriage will last. But we know that living together before you get married actually has resulted in higher divorce rates. We also know that common sense is culturally bound. So belief systems are tied to specific groups and specific cultures. So let's look at the example of common sense being attached to it's important to date before you actually marry someone. So it might be pretty strange in Canadian culture for people to think about marrying someone they haven't dated before. But let's unpack that. So let's instead look at sociology based on scientific research. And that means research that is credible. We actually know from the data that more men are involved in car accidents annually than women, which is why, guys, you pay a higher insurance rate. We also know that sociology is evidence-based. It challenges those commonly held beliefs. So sometimes people say, wow, the murder rate in Canada is really high. And as a sociologist, you would say, yeah, that's not really true. And our homicide rate has been basically the same since 1962 with very little fluctuation. Also, when you challenge commonly held beliefs, let's look at the example of stranger danger. So we teach our children from the time that they're very young to be very careful of strangers. And not to say that that's unwise. But as a criminologist, when you look at people who are victims of violent crime, they're more often than not people who are intimate or well known to that individual than the stranger. So using that kind of logic is evidence-based. Sociology also considers other viewpoints. It's helping individuals to move beyond their established or traditional ways of thinking. So let's look over here at the concept of dating before marriage. That's a common sense notion that people should do that. You should get to know somebody before you marry them. But that's culture bound. And when we look at other cultures where parents select life mates for people, and those marriages work, then we sometimes have to move beyond the ways that we normally think about things. In that case, about mate selection. Now, if you were sitting in class with me on the first day, I'd hand you each a fortune cookie. You can eat them if you want, but break them open, and most importantly, read what's written on the little white slip inside. And we would read those out loud to each other. And we'd laugh. And some people would say, ooh, wow, that's really close to the truth. Right? But we know that that is not science. Right? Those are myths. What we're talking about in sociology is science. It's a way for us to see our lives in a context. It helps us to explain our lives, and these explanations are supported through evidence that is produced by research. Not fortune cookie truth, and not common sense. So we know we do get knowledge from our lived experience, and that's in a large part where common sense comes from. And it may be accurate, but it's not always reliable. And those are different. And in research methods, I'll tell you why those are different. Things that are commonly known are not necessarily factual. So I asked John before class if he would sit with me and do a little test here to help us to illustrate that sociology uses scientific method, that it involves critical thinking skills, that it involves using analytical skills, and that it uses a wide variety of research methods, scientific research methods, to understand the social world around us. So maybe you can play along, but we're going to use John's answers to this test for this scenario. So this is a little quiz. You can find it online yourself on PlayBuzz. And I want you to see what this says. It says, this psychological evaluation is designed to see if a person has the psychopath gene. So they're suggesting that psychopathy is actually genetic. And now we're going to do a little self-reported test to see if you have the gene. So we're not testing your genetic markers. We're going to get you to self-report questions. So right from there, you can already question the validity of this kind of test. So let's start. So I asked John to answer these questions for me. I asked him to rate on a scale using this sentence. I find myself in the same kind of trouble time after time. And John's response was, yes, very much. And I asked John to respond to, I'm often bored. And he said, yes, very much, particularly right now with COVID. I asked him, do you quickly lose interest in tasks that you start? He said, yes, very much. Is making a lot of money very important to me? Well, not the most important thing, he said, but pretty important, so he gave it a 4. My main concern is the bottom line. And John said, no, there are other things important in life to me, so I'm going to put neutral for that. Most people are just stupid, and John said, absolutely, I agree 100%. I'm not trying to hurt others in the pursuit of my goal. He said, I don't really care whether I hurt people or not in the pursuit of my goals. And this is not my picture, folks. I enjoy manipulating other people's feelings. John says, no, I don't really like hurting people. I feel bad if my words or my actions cause someone else to feel emotional pain. John said, sometimes, yeah, I don't intentionally do it, but if I have to say something that's the truth, then I have to say it. So he said, no, I'm going to give that a 4. Cheating is not justified because it's unfair to others. John said, yes, very much. Now you need to pick true and false. I am superior to most people. John said, well, I'm not bragging, but you know what? Like, I'm an incredible athlete. I'm smart. No, I'd have to say that I am superior to most people. I lie to make things go smoother. John says, yeah, I hate to admit this, but yeah, I do. I rarely feel guilty. I says, oh, I try to live a good life, so I don't really have a lot to feel guilty about. So, yeah, I rarely feel guilty. I'm an emotional person. John says, yeah, no, I don't usually ever cry. I often get others to pay things for me. And John says, yeah, no, I usually pay for things myself. I speak with authority. John says, yeah, I'm a pretty assertive person. And so now, I asked John to answer truthfully. Did you ever shoplift or take things that didn't belong to you? John says, yeah, I hate to admit it, but when I was a teenager, I did shoplift once. I never got caught, but I did. Were you close to your family growing up? John says, yeah, no, not really. I fought a lot with my dad. Did you ever have an imaginary friend growing up? John said, no. Have you ever wanted to hurt somebody because they wronged you? John says, yeah, I can actually think of a couple of examples of when I wanted to do that. Have you ever played with the lives of others? And John says, no, I don't think I'm intentionally manipulative. So let's calculate John's results. Waiting. Oh, look it. Playbuzz tells us that John's a psychopath. We're a little scared to say this, but okay, here we go. You didn't pass the psychopath test. You're not a very social person. You prefer to being alone in your apartment, doing things on your own with no intervention from the outside. You are not a very empathetic person, but you don't see that as a problem. You see that as an advantage. Our advice to you is to try to be more social without kidnapping anyone and see how you feel you might like it. Do you agree with the result? So, obviously, this is an exaggerated example, but it is an example of how we need to be careful of what gets presented as truth in understanding our social world. Actually diagnosing someone as a psychopath is a very intensive process, and we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to our unit on criminology. So when we look at evidence-based information, where do you think we can actually get credible sources of information from? If I had a nickel for every time that a student said to me, well, I saw it on Facebook. Now, there are things that can be posted on Facebook that come from legitimate sources that can be evidence-based information. but a large majority of the information that is on Facebook has to be screened very carefully. You can find credible sources of information through sites like Google Scholar, which you can use for research that has peer-reviewed research on it. You could look at information that comes from Statistics Canada, or you could look at things that come from scientific journals, like the Canadian Journal of Criminology and Criminal Justice. So we know sociology is a science. Let's look at the difference between what objectivity is and what subjectivity is. Now, just as a disclaimer, we know that nothing can ever be purely objective. But the premise is that scientific method is built on objectivity. And that means that it follows a series of scientific steps, it uses reason, and it uses evidence to interpret an event. It avoids personal bias and prejudice as much as possible, but we can't always be purely objective. Subjectivity, on the other hand, is about an understanding of your personal experience or your subjective experience, and recognizes that it's also important. And we do know that studying the lived experiences of people adds to our understanding of society. So not everything is purely objective, and not all subjectivity is bad. But how do we know what's scientific? Well, let's see if David Copperfield can help us out.
So far you've been watching David do magic before a live audience. Now it's your turn to participate. In a moment, all you have to do is simply touch your television screen. As unbelievable as it sounds, David will try to make the magic happen right in your own home.
That's right. Tonight you've seen me choose people from the audience. Now I'm choosing you. It's important because if you don't play along in the next few minutes, it'll be totally meaningless.
Here's the plan. If there are 7 of you in the room, choose one person to participate. Right now, stand up and come close to your TV.
Close enough to actually touch your screen. Do it now, and touch my finger. That wasn't the cool part. You can let go of the screen now. But don't move away, because in a moment, by touching the screen, you and I are going to do something really amazing. Now take a good look at these destinations of flight, and listen carefully. Here's the idea. Tonight, you're going to put your finger here, and fly from place to place around the circle. And I'm going to find you. The amazing thing is, even though you're at home and I'm here, I'll know exactly where you are. There are many places to fly to. A star, the clouds, a moon, and so on. And I want you to think of a secret number between 5 and 15. Any number between 5 and 15. It's your choice. I have no idea what number you're thinking of. In a moment, you're going to move your finger the same number of times as your secret number. For example, if your secret number was 9, you'd move 9 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, bringing you to the island. If it were 6, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. There are a lot of possibilities. This is your last chance to participate, so come real close to your TV so you can touch it. Stand over here so everyone can see. Right now, put your finger here, and get ready to move the amount equal to your secret number. Move as I count. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. When you reach your secret number, stop and keep your finger there. Good. Now get ready to move in the other direction. The same number you just moved, the amount equivalent to your secret number. Move in this direction as I count. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on. When you finish, leave your finger on the final place you've touched. Now I know that you're not in the rainbow, so I'll take it away. And I know you're not in the castle, so I'll remove it. And I know you're not in the mountains, so I'll take that away. And I know you're not in the pyramids either, so I'll remove them too. In a moment, I'll ask you to move 4 times, either in this direction or that direction, whichever direction you want. Move 4 times. Ready? 1, 2, 3, 4. And keep your finger there. Now I know you're not in the Eiffel Tower, and I know you're not in the clouds, and I know you're not in the city either. Keep your finger touching the screen. I'm going to take this arrow and put it right here. Remember, you chose your own secret number, and you flew at random around the screen. But believe it or not, even though you're at home and I'm here, I'm going to find you. Keep touching and watch. You're on the move.
So David Copperfield is a magician, but what he just did was not magic. And it's the same thing when we ask ourselves the question, how do we find evidence about things that we can't explain? Well, we don't find those by magic. We use scientific methods to study them and understand them, just like David Copperfield uses scientific method to create his magic. In this particular example, he's using math. And in many of his magic tricks, he's using physics and science. So let's review what we've learned so far. Sociology is a social science. It uses scientific method and research to study human society and social behavior. It requires critical thinking, and sociology is based on evidence from research. It's not based on common sense, myths, guessing, or magic. Coming up next, a continuation of Unit 1, Part 2.